The door opened with the measured precision that could only belong to one man. Admiral James Michael McKenzie stepped into the Oceanview Community Center with the bearing of someone who had commanded aircraft carriers and briefed presidents. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, 6 feet 2 inches of disciplined muscle, silver hair cropped in a regulation cut that hadn't changed in 4 decades, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Atlantic. His dress blue uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned with mathematical precision, the 4 stars on his shoulder boards catching the afternoon light like beacons of authority. But what struck me most as he surveyed the scene wasn't his uniform or his rank. It was the expression on his face as he took in the chaos. My stepfamily still shouting accusations, Jessica's phone still recording, my friends bristling with protective anger, and me, his pregnant daughter, standing in the middle of it all with tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. Admiral McKenzie's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. His storm gray eyes swept the room with the tactical assessment of a man who had navigated political minefields in the Pentagon and hostile waters in the South China Sea. I watched him catalog every detail. The baby shower decorations, the overturned gift table where Derek had bumped into it during his tirade, the protective stance of my Navy friends, and most importantly, the phone in Jessica's hand that was broadcasting this humiliation to the internet. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that could silence a room full of arguing admirals. "I apologize for being late. Traffic from Norfolk was heavier than anticipated." The normalcy of his words created a strange pocket of peace in the chaos. This was my father, always punctual, always courteous, always in control. But I could see the storm building behind his measured facade. Admiral McKenzie didn't just command respect, he expected it. And what he was witnessing right now was a level of disrespect that violated every principle he'd spent his life defending. Linda, however, was too caught up in her own righteous fury to read the room. She turned toward my father with the same aggressive energy she'd been directing at me, apparently deciding that now was the perfect time to expand her audience for Sarah's public humiliation. "Oh, perfect," she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Here comes the great Admiral McKenzie to rescue his precious daughter." "Well, Admiral, maybe you can explain to everyone how you raised such a disappointment." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My Navy friends went completely still. The kind of stillness that comes from recognizing a superior officer and understanding that someone had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. Chief Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly. Kelly's mouth fell open. Marcus actually took a step backward, as if physically recoiling from the magnitude of Linda's mistake. But Admiral McKenzie didn't react. Not yet. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back in the parade rest position that was as natural to him as breathing, and listened as Linda continued to dig her own grave. "Your daughter," Linda continued, apparently mistaking his silence for permission to proceed, "is a disgrace to everything you taught her. Look at her. 8 months pregnant, no husband, no father for that baby. She's made a mockery of family values, of everything decent and traditional." Derek, emboldened by his stepmother's attack, decided to join in. "Yeah, Admiral McKenzie, maybe you can tell us how proud you are of your slut daughter who couldn't keep her legs closed." The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Even Jessica lowered her phone slightly, some primitive survival instinct finally kicking in as she began to sense the danger in the room. Admiral McKenzie still didn't move, but when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of 35 years of naval command, the authority of a man who had stared down foreign adversaries and emerged victorious from conflicts that most people would never even know about. "I'm sorry," he said, with deadly quiet precision. "Did you just refer to my daughter, a commissioned officer in the United States Navy, a woman who has served her country with distinction for 7 years, as a slut?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Linda's confidence faltered slightly, but she was too committed to her attack to back down now. "I called her what she is," Linda said, though her voice lacked some of its earlier conviction. A woman who got herself pregnant out of wedlock and expects everyone to celebrate her for it. I see. Admiral McKenzie's voice remained perfectly level, but I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching, the only outward sign of the fury building beneath his composed exterior. And you felt it was appropriate to come to her baby shower, uninvited, to share this opinion with her friends and colleagues? Carol, sensing that Linda might be losing ground, decided to pile on. Admiral, we're family. We have a right to express our concerns about Sarah's choices. She's brought shame on all of us. Shame. Admiral McKenzie repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. You believe that my daughter, who graduated summa cum laude from George Washington University, who completed officer candidate school in the top 5% of her class, who has received commendations for her work in naval intelligence, has brought shame on your family? She's having a baby out of wedlock, Derek shouted, apparently deciding that volume would make his argument more compelling. She's a single mother who's going to be a burden on everyone around her. That's when Admiral McKenzie moved. It wasn't dramatic or threatening. He simply took 3 measured steps forward, placing himself between my stepfamily and me. But those 3 steps transformed the entire dynamic of the room. Suddenly, Linda, Derek, Jessica, and Carol found themselves facing down one of the most decorated officers in the United States Navy, a man whose presence commanded respect from 4-star generals and foreign dignitaries alike. Let me make something very clear, Admiral McKenzie said, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge that could cut steel. Lieutenant McKenzie is not just my daughter. She is an officer in the United States Navy. She has devoted her career to protecting this country's interests, analyzing threats that could cost American lives, and serving with a level of dedication that most civilians couldn't begin to understand. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The fact that she is having a child, whether married or not, does not diminish her service, her value, or her worth as a human being. The fact that you think it does says far more about your character than it does about hers. Linda's face was turning red, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. Admiral, with all due respect? No. The single word cut through her protest like a blade. You don't get to say, with all due respect, after the way you've conducted yourself here today. Respect is earned through action, and your actions have shown a complete lack of respect for my daughter, for her service, and for the institution she represents. Admiral McKenzie turned slightly, addressing the room but keeping his body positioned protectively between my stepfamily and me. For those of you who may not be familiar with military culture, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man giving a briefing to Congress, when you attack a service member's character, their integrity, or their worth, you are not just attacking an individual. You are attacking the principles that our military stands for. You are attacking the values that men and women have died to defend. Derek, apparently too stupid to recognize when he was outgunned, decided to double down. Oh, come on, Admiral, don't make this about patriotism. This is about your daughter being irresponsible. Admiral McKenzie turned to face Derek directly, and I watched my half-brother actually take a step backward under the weight of that stare. Irresponsible? Admiral McKenzie's voice was dangerously quiet. Let me tell you about responsibility, son. Responsibility is volunteering to serve your country when you could have chosen an easier path. Responsibility is spending months away from family and friends to protect people who will never know your name. Responsibility is making life and death decisions that affect the safety of your fellow service members and the security of your nation. He paused, and I could see Derek shrinking under the verbal assault. My daughter has demonstrated more responsibility in her 7 years of service than you have shown in your entire life. The fact that she is choosing to raise a child, to take on that additional responsibility while continuing to serve her country, is not a sign of weakness or poor judgment. It is a testament to her strength and her commitment to building something meaningful with her life. Jessica, apparently realizing that her live stream was not going according to plan, tried to interject. But Admiral, you have to admit that having a baby without a husband is not ideal. What I have to admit, Admiral McKenzie interrupted, his attention now focused on Jessica and her phone, is that your decision to live stream this conversation without my daughter's consent is a violation of her privacy and potentially a criminal act, depending on the laws in this jurisdiction. Jessica's hand trembled slightly as she held her phone. It's just Facebook. It's not. Turn it off. The command was delivered with the same authority Admiral McKenzie had once used to direct naval operations in the Persian Gulf. Turn it off now, or I will have base security confiscate your device as evidence of harassment of a naval officer. You can't do that, Carol protested. This is a civilian matter. Admiral McKenzie smiled for the first time since entering the room, but it was not a pleasant expression. Ma'am, my daughter is a commissioned officer in the United States Navy with an active security clearance. Harassment of military personnel, especially when recorded and broadcast, falls under federal jurisdiction. I assure you, I can and will pursue every legal remedy available to protect her. The room fell silent except for the sound of Jessica frantically tapping her phone screen to end the live stream. But Admiral McKenzie wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice gaining momentum like a battleship building steam, I find it interesting that you chose today, the day of my daughter's baby shower, a celebration of new life and hope for the future, to launch this attack. You didn't call her. You didn't request a private meeting. You didn't attempt to handle this as adults or as family. Instead, you chose to ambush her in front of her friends, to humiliate her publicly, and to record it for your own entertainment. Linda tried to regain control of the narrative. Admiral, we were trying to make her see reason. Reason? Admiral McKenzie's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. You call it reasonable to burst into a private celebration and call my daughter a slut? You call it reasonable to refer to my grandchild as a bastard? You call it reasonable to suggest that a decorated naval officer is a disgrace to her family? The words hung in the air like artillery shells waiting to explode. I could see my stepfamily beginning to realize that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had expected to find a vulnerable pregnant woman they could shame into submission. Instead, they had walked into a confrontation with one of the most powerful men in the United States Navy. Let me be very clear about something, Admiral McKenzie continued, his voice returning to that deadly quiet tone that was somehow more intimidating than shouting. Lieutenant McKenzie is not just my daughter. She is my heir, my legacy, and the person I am most proud of in this world. She has achieved more in her 25 years than most people accomplish in a lifetime. She has served her country with honor, earned the respect of her peers and superiors, and is now preparing to take on the most important mission of her life, raising the next generation. He paused, his eyes scanning each member of my stepfamily in turn. The fact that you cannot see her worth, that you choose to focus on what you perceive as her failings rather than celebrating her achievements, tells me everything I need to know about your character and your values. Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching this confrontation with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up from her seat near the gift table. Admiral, sir, if I may, I've known your daughter since she moved into our apartment complex. She is one of the finest young women I've ever met. Kind, responsible, always willing to help her neighbors. These people, she gestured toward my stepfamily with obvious disdain, have no idea what kind of person they're attacking. Admiral McKenzie turned toward Mrs. Patterson and gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. Thank you, ma'am. That means a great deal coming from a Navy wife. Mrs. Patterson straightened in her chair, a look of surprise crossing her face. How did you know? Your bearing, ma'am. The way you've conducted yourself today, the way you spoke up to defend my daughter, you have the strength that comes from loving someone in the service. Admiral McKenzie's voice softened slightly. My late wife had that same strength. The mention of my mother, Admiral McKenzie's beloved Elizabeth, who had died of cancer when I was 12, sent a pang through my heart. She had been the perfect Navy wife, strong, independent, capable of running our household single-handedly during my father's deployments, but also warm and loving and endlessly supportive of both of us. Admiral McKenzie turned back to my stepfamily, and his voice hardened again. My wife would have been proud of the woman Sarah has become. She would have been thrilled about this baby. She would have been here today, helping to celebrate and prepare for her grandchild's arrival. What she would not have tolerated, what I will not tolerate, is anyone attacking our daughter's character or suggesting that she is anything less than extraordinary. Derek, apparently incapable of learning from his mistakes, decided to try a different approach. Look, Admiral, we get that you're proud of Sarah, but don't you think she should have waited until she was married? Don't you think she should have found a good man first? The question seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. Admiral McKenzie stared at Derek with an expression I had seen him use during congressional hearings when dealing with particularly obtuse politicians. Are you asking me whether I think my daughter should have prioritized finding a husband over serving her country? Admiral McKenzie asked slowly. Are you suggesting that her value as a person is dependent on her marital status? I'm just saying that traditional families, Derek began. Traditional families, Admiral McKenzie interrupted, are built on love, respect, and mutual support. What you've demonstrated here today is the opposite of family values. You've shown cruelty, judgment, and a complete lack of compassion for a pregnant woman. Admiral McKenzie began to pace slowly, his hands still clasped behind his back, but his movement now carrying the controlled energy of a predator circling its prey. Let me tell you about my daughter's father, he said, his voice taking on a storytelling quality that somehow made his words even more powerful. Her biological father, my predecessor in her life, was a man who chose to abandon his responsibilities. He walked away when Sarah was 3 years old, leaving her mother to raise her alone. I felt my breath catch. Admiral McKenzie rarely spoke about my biological father, the man whose name wasn't even on my birth certificate. When I married Elizabeth, I didn't just marry a woman. I chose to become a father to her daughter. I chose to love Sarah as my own, to guide her, to support her dreams, and to be proud of her achievements. That is what family means. That is what love means. He stopped pacing and faced my stepfamily directly. Sarah could have followed the same path as her biological father. She could have chosen the easy road, avoided commitment, avoided responsibility. Instead, she chose service. She chose dedication. She chose to spend her life protecting people like you, even though you clearly don't appreciate or deserve that protection. The words hit Derek like physical blows. I could see him flinching with each sentence, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. And now, Admiral McKenzie continued, when she has chosen to take on the additional responsibility of motherhood, to bring new life into this world and raise that child with love and dedication, you want to shame her for it? You want to suggest that she is somehow less worthy because she doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptability? Linda tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. Admiral, we're not saying she's not worthy. We're just concerned about the example she's setting. The example she's setting? Admiral McKenzie's voice rose again, and this time there was no mistaking his anger. The example she's setting is that women can serve their country with distinction while also choosing to be mothers. The example she's setting is that strength comes from character, not from conforming to other people's expectations. The example she's setting is that family is what you make it, not what other people define it as. He gestured toward my friends from the base, who had been watching this entire confrontation with a mixture of awe and growing respect for my father. Look around this room. Look at the people who chose to be here today to celebrate Sarah and her baby. These are people who understand what service means, what sacrifice means, what honor means. These are people who see my daughter for who she truly is, not who you think she should be. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward slightly, her voice respectful but firm. Admiral, sir, if I may. Lieutenant McKenzie is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to serve with. Her pregnancy hasn't diminished her capabilities or her dedication. If anything, it's shown us even more of her strength. Kelly nodded emphatically. Sir, she's been an inspiration to all of us. Seeing how she's handled the challenges of pregnancy while maintaining her duties, how she's prepared for motherhood while still being an excellent officer, it's shown us what's possible. Marcus spoke up from his position near the door. Admiral, your daughter has earned our respect through her actions, her integrity, and her commitment to excellence. What these people are saying about her, it doesn't match the officer we know and serve with. Admiral McKenzie nodded toward each of them in turn. Thank you. Your words confirm what I already knew, that Sarah has built a chosen family of people who value her for who she is, not who they think she should be. Quote, He turned back to my stepfamily, and his voice carried a finality that made it clear this conversation was approaching its end. You came here today expecting to find a vulnerable woman you could shame and humiliate. Instead, you found an officer surrounded by people who respect her, protected by people who value her, and defended by people who understand her worth. Admiral McKenzie moved closer to me, placing himself squarely between my stepfamily and my growing belly. You also found her father, a man who has spent his entire career defending the principles you've attacked today. A man who will not stand by and watch anyone, family or otherwise, disrespect his daughter or his grandchild. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Derek seemed to finally understand that he was out of his league. Jessica had long since stopped recording, her phone hanging limp in her hand. Carol was staring at the floor, apparently unable to meet Admiral McKenzie's eyes. And Linda looked like she was finally beginning to grasp the full extent of her miscalculation. But Admiral McKenzie wasn't finished. He had one more torpedo to fire. There's something else you should know, he said, his voice returning to that conversational tone that somehow made his words even more devastating. I've been in touch with the base legal office regarding some concerning rumors about harassment of pregnant service members. They've been very interested in gathering evidence about such incidents. Jessica's face went white. You can't. We didn't. Oh, but I can. Admiral McKenzie smiled that cold, dangerous smile again. And you did. You recorded yourselves harassing a pregnant naval officer, calling her derogatory names, and attempting to shame her for her personal choices. You then broadcast that harassment on social media. He pulled out his own phone, apparently checking something on the screen. I've been recording this conversation since I entered the room, he announced calmly. For security purposes, you understand. As I mentioned earlier, my daughter has an active security clearance, and threats or harassment directed at cleared personnel must be documented and reported. The room erupted in shocked voices as my stepfamily realized the full scope of their situation. They had come here to humiliate me, to record my shame for their own entertainment. Instead, they had been recorded themselves, captured in the act of harassing a pregnant naval officer in front of witnesses who could testify to their behavior. Furthermore, Admiral McKenzie continued over their protests, I'll be forwarding copies of this recording to base security, to my daughter's chain of command for their awareness, and to my personal attorney for review regarding potential civil remedies. Linda found her voice again, but it was shaky and desperate. Admiral, surely we can work this out. We're a family. No, Admiral McKenzie cut her off with decisive finality. You are not family. Family supports each other. Family celebrates each other's achievements. Family protects each other from harm. He gestured toward the ruined baby shower around us. Overturned chairs, scattered gifts, the cake I'd been cutting now forgotten on its table. What you did here today was the opposite of family. You came here with the intention of causing pain, of creating shame, of destroying what should have been a joyful celebration. That is not the behavior of family. That is the behavior of enemies. Admiral McKenzie's words hit with the force of a final judgment, and I could see my stepfamily beginning to understand that there would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, no way back from the line they had crossed. I want you to leave, Admiral McKenzie said simply. I want you to leave now, and I want you to understand that you are no longer welcome in my daughter's life or in mine. You have shown your true character today, and that character is incompatible with the values we hold dear. Derek made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Come on, Admiral, you can't seriously be choosing Sarah over family. I am not choosing Sarah over family, Admiral McKenzie replied with quiet dignity. I am choosing family over cruelty. I am choosing love over judgment. I am choosing honor over hatred. He looked each of them in the eye one final time. And make no mistake, Sarah is my family. Sarah and her child are my family. The people in this room who came to celebrate with her are her family. You are strangers who happen to share some DNA and a legal relationship that ends today. The finality of those words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. My stepfamily stood there for a moment, apparently unsure what to do next, before Linda finally gathered what remained of her dignity and headed for the door. This isn't over, she said as she passed Admiral McKenzie. Yes, he replied calmly, it is. And as they filed out of the community center, Linda seething, Derek sulking, Jessica clutching her phone like a lifeline, and Carol bringing up the rear in embarrassed silence. I realized that Admiral McKenzie was right. It was over. The pretense of family relationship, the obligation to tolerate their judgment, the burden of trying to earn their approval, all of it was finished. What remained was the family I had chosen, and the family that had chosen me, the people who stood by me now, who valued me for who I was, and who were ready to support me as I embarked on the greatest adventure of my life. Admiral McKenzie turned to face me, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, I saw the gentle father I'd always known behind the stern naval commander. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he asked softly. And despite everything that had just happened, despite the pain and humiliation of the last hour, I found myself smiling. "I am now, Dad. I am now." I was 8 months pregnant, surrounded by friends at my baby shower, when my estranged family burst through the door screaming that I was a disgrace to the family name. What they didn't know was that my Admiral father had just pulled into the driveway, and nobody, absolutely nobody, disrespects his daughter in uniform. Asterisk. Part 1, The Shocking Arrival, Extended Version. Asterisk. The morning of October 15th started like a dream I'd been waiting 9 months to live. Lieutenant Sarah Elizabeth McKenzie, that's me, though most people just call me Lieutenant McKenzie or Mac if they know me well enough, finally had a precious weekend pass from Norfolk Naval Base. After months of morning sickness that seemed to last all day, swollen ankles that barely fit in my regulation boots, and the constant exhaustion that comes with growing a human being while maintaining the demanding schedule of a Naval Intelligence Officer, I was ready for something beautiful. Something normal. Something that reminded me why I was fighting so hard to balance motherhood with my military career. The Oceanview Community Center in Virginia Beach had been transformed into a pastel paradise by my friends. Soft pink and lavender streamers hung from the ceiling in gentle curves, white balloons clustered in corners like clouds, and a banner reading, "Welcome Baby McKenzie," stretched across the main wall in elegant script. The tables were covered in cream-colored linens, each one topped with small potted succulents that my college roommate Maya had spent weeks growing herself. She'd driven down from Washington D.C. the night before, staying in my tiny off-base apartment, helping me pick out the perfect outfit and listening to me practice my thank you speech for the 100th time. I was wearing my dress blue uniform, the formal navy outfit with the crisp white shirt, navy jacket with gold buttons, and my ribbons displayed proudly on my chest. Some people had suggested I wear a maternity dress, something more traditionally feminine for a baby shower, but this uniform meant everything to me. Each ribbon told a story of deployment, commendation, and service to my country. The Surface Warfare Officer pin gleamed on my left breast, earned after months of grueling training and sleepless nights studying maritime operations. The Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal caught the light whenever I moved, a reminder of the cybersecurity protocols I'd developed that were now being used fleet-wide. Sure, the jacket didn't button properly anymore over my 8-month belly, and I'd had to get creative with safety pins to make everything fit. But I was proud of who I was. I was proud of the woman I'd become, the officer I'd grown into, and the mother I was about to be. This baby, my little one, was going to know from day one that their mom was someone who served something bigger than herself. The guest list was small but meaningful. My closest friends from the base had driven over after their Saturday morning PT, Lieutenant Junior Grade Kelly Chen from the Communications Department, who always made me laugh during our lunch breaks. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson from Engineering, who'd become like a big brother to me since I'd arrived at Norfolk. And Chief Petty Officer Lisa Rodriguez, a tough-as-nails woman who'd taken me under her wing when I was still figuring out how to command respect in a male-dominated field. These were people who understood what it meant to serve, who respected my choices, and who'd never once questioned my decision to have this baby as a single mother. Maya was there too, of course, bustling around the room with nervous energy, making sure every detail was perfect. We'd been roommates at George Washington University, where I'd studied international relations while she pursued her master's in social work. She was the maid of honor at the wedding I'd never had, the godmother to the baby whose father would never be in the picture, and the sister I'd chosen when my biological family had made it clear I wasn't welcome in their version of normal. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from the apartment complex had surprised me by showing up with a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies, the real kind, made from scratch with butter and love. She was in her 70s, a Navy widow whose husband had served on destroyers in the Pacific during Vietnam. When she'd learned I was pregnant and single, she'd started leaving care packages outside my door. Homemade soup when I was too tired to cook, baby clothes she'd found at estate sales, and little notes reminding me that some of the strongest people she'd ever known were military mothers. Even Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh had stopped by, though she couldn't stay long. She was my direct supervisor, a woman who'd climbed the ranks in naval intelligence through sheer brilliance and determination. She'd been instrumental in ensuring I could maintain my clearance and continue my duties throughout my pregnancy, working with medical and command to create a modified schedule that kept me valuable to the mission while protecting my health and the baby's. The afternoon had been perfect in that gentle, golden way that makes you want to preserve every moment in amber. We'd played silly games, guessing the baby's weight and due date, matching baby photos to their grown-up owners, trying to identify pureed baby foods while blindfolded. I'd opened gifts that made me cry happy tears. A hand-knitted blanket from Mrs. Patterson in navy blue and white, a diaper bag that looked more like a professional briefcase from Maya, practical items like bottles and onesies from my Navy friends, who understood that my budget was tight on a lieutenant's salary. Kelly had brought a gift that made everyone laugh, a onesie that read Future Admiral in tiny gold letters. For when they're ready to follow in their mom's footsteps, she'd said with a wink. Or they can be anything they want to be, I'd replied, rubbing my belly. Doctor, teacher, artist, engineer. As long as they're kind and work hard, I'll be proud. Marcus had surprised me with something unexpected, a wooden jewelry box he'd crafted himself in the base workshop, with a tiny nameplate that read, Lieutenant McKenzie's Treasures. Inside, he'd placed a small silver locket. For pictures of the little one, he'd explained. And maybe someday pictures of their mom in uniform, so they know what kind of woman raised them. I was cutting into the cake. A simple white sheet cake with pink and blue flowers that Maya had ordered from a local bakery, when I felt the first flutter of unease. It was nothing specific, just a sense that something had shifted in the atmosphere. The kind of intuition you develop in intelligence work, where reading a room correctly can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. That's when the door to the community center slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Linda Castellanos, my stepmother for the past 6 years, though she'd never felt like any kind of mother to me, stood in the doorway like an avenging angel of judgment. Her face was flushed red with anger, her perfectly styled blonde hair slightly disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it during the drive over. She was wearing what I'd always thought of as her confrontation outfit, a tailored black blazer, designer jeans, and heels that clicked like weapons on hard floors. Behind her stood my half-brother Derek, 23 years old and still living in our stepfather's house, his weak chin jutting forward in that aggressive way he'd perfected in high school when he wanted to look tough. Derek's wife Jessica flanked him, her phone already out and recording, her lips curved in the kind of smile that promised destruction. She was live streaming to Facebook, I realized, with growing horror, broadcasting whatever was about to happen to her network of gossips and drama seekers. Bringing up the rear was Aunt Carol, Linda's sister, a woman who'd made a career out of other people's business and had opinions about everything from politics to proper child-rearing, despite never having served her country or raised successful children of her own. The room went dead silent. My friends from the base immediately shifted into defensive positions without even thinking about it. Years of training made their spines straighten and their eyes sharpen. Maya moved closer to me, her social worker instincts kicking in as she assessed the threat level. Mrs. Patterson's elderly hands trembled slightly, but her jaw set with the determination of a woman who'd weathered harder storms than this. There she is, Linda announced to the room, her voice dripping with theatrical disgust. Little Miss Perfect in her little costume, playing soldier while she's about to become an unwed mother. The word costume hit me like a physical blow. This uniform wasn't a costume. It was a symbol of everything I'd worked for, sacrificed for, earned through blood, sweat, and tears. The sleepless nights studying for promotion exams, the deployments that had taken me away from everything familiar, the respect I'd fought to earn in a field where women still had to prove themselves twice as hard as men. "Linda," I managed to say, my voice barely steady as I set down the cake knife. "What are you doing here?" Derek laughed, the same cruel sound he'd made in high school when he'd found new ways to torment me. "We came to tell everyone the truth about St. Sarah. How she got herself knocked up by some random guy, and expects the family to just pretend it's normal." Jessica held her phone higher, making sure she captured my face. "We're live streaming this on Facebook," she announced proudly. "Everyone deserves to know what kind of person you really are. A military slut who couldn't keep her legs closed." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I felt my baby kick, as if sensing my distress, and I placed both hands protectively over my belly. Around me, my friends bristled with barely contained fury. Chief Rodriguez took a step forward, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in the Navy. "Ma'am, this is a private event. You need to leave, now." Linda whipped around to face her, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. This is about family business, and I'll handle it however I see fit." "Family?" The word came out of me with more force than I'd intended. I stood slowly, using the table for support, feeling every eye in the room on me. "You haven't considered me family since the day I enlisted. You made that perfectly clear at every family gathering, every holiday, every time you forgot to invite me to events. Because you chose the military over us," Derek shouted, his face reddening with the same rage that had characterized his teenage years. "You chose your precious career over being a proper daughter, a proper woman. And now look at you, 8 months pregnant and alone, just like we said would happen. Just like we warned everyone would happen when you decided to play soldier, instead of finding a good man and settling down like a normal person." Carol stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "We tried to help you, Sarah. We tried to guide you toward a better path. But you were always too stubborn, too proud, and now you're going to raise a bastard child while pretending to be some kind of hero." The word bastard sent a shockwave through the room. Maya gasped audibly. Mrs. Patterson struggled to her feet, her cane shaking in her grip. "How dare you?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was thin but fierce. "How dare you come into this place and speak that way about this young woman and her child? Sarah McKenzie is one of the finest people I've ever known. She serves her country with honor, she's going to be a wonderful mother, and you should be ashamed of yourselves." Linda turned on her like a rabid dog. "Mind your own business, old woman. You don't know anything about our family or what this girl has put us through." "What I've put you through?" I found my voice again, stronger this time. "I've put you through the terrible ordeal of having a stepdaughter who serves her country, the unbearable burden of being related to someone who has a career, who contributes to society, who's making something of herself." Jessica laughed, still recording. "Making something of yourself? You're a single mother who's about to destroy her career. Everyone knows the military doesn't really want pregnant women around. You'll be pushed out within a year, mark my words. Then what? You'll come crawling back to us, begging for help." Kelly stepped forward, her voice ice cold. "Ma'am, I think you need to check your facts. The Navy has excellent support systems for military families, including single mothers. Lieutenant McKenzie is valued in her position and will continue to serve with distinction." "Oh, please," Derek scoffed. "Don't give us that politically correct bullshit. Everyone knows she's screwed up her life, and now she's trying to pretend it's some kind of feminist victory." Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one time to show some respect. You're talking about one of the finest officers I've ever served with." "Respect?" Linda's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Respect for what? For getting herself pregnant by God knows who? For embarrassing our family name? For making a mockery of everything decent and traditional?" That's when the real truth came out, the poison that had been festering in their hearts for years. "You want to know what this is really about?" Carol stepped forward, her face twisted with years of resentment. "This is about how you think you're better than us. How you look down on us with your fancy uniform and your college degree and your important job. You think we don't see it in your eyes every time you come around, if you bother to come around at all. You think you're some kind of hero," Derek added, "but you're just a stuck-up bitch who joined the military because you couldn't handle real life, real relationships, real responsibilities. And now," Linda's voice rose to a crescendo, "now you're going to bring a bastard child into this world, and expect everyone to celebrate you for it. Well, we're not going to stand by and watch you make a fool of our family name anymore." The room erupted in response. Kelly and Marcus both started forward. Chief Rodriguez barked an order for them to maintain discipline. Maya moved to place herself between me and my attackers, and Mrs. Patterson was shouting something about respect for pregnant women. But all I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat, the rush of blood in my ears, and the sick feeling of being stripped naked in front of people I cared about. They weren't just attacking me. They were attacking my baby, my choices, my entire life. They were trying to destroy the one day that was supposed to be about love and celebration and hope for the future. I felt tears stinging my eyes, and I hated myself for it. I was a Naval Intelligence Officer. I'd briefed admirals, analyzed threats to national security, maintained composure under pressure that would break most people. But here, surrounded by baby shower decorations and homemade cookies, I felt like a scared little girl being bullied by people who were supposed to love her. That's when I heard it. The rumble of a diesel engine pulling into the parking lot. Not just any engine, I knew that sound. A Crown Victoria, government-issued, maintained to military specifications. The engine shut off with mechanical precision, and I heard the distinctive sound of a car door closing with the controlled force that only comes from years of military discipline. Then footsteps. Heavy, measured, purposeful. The kind of footsteps that had walked the decks of aircraft carriers, paced the floors of Pentagon briefing rooms, and carried their owner through 35 years of distinguished naval service. And for the first time since Linda had burst through that door, I smiled. Because Admiral James Michael McKenzie, my father, my hero, the man who had taught me that honor was not negotiable and that you never, ever backed down from a fight when you were in the right, had just arrived for his daughter's baby shower. Admiral McKenzie wasn't just my father, he was a legend in the Navy. A man who had commanded destroyer squadrons, served as deputy commander of the Pacific Fleet, and earned the respect of every officer who had ever served under him. He was the kind of leader who inspired loyalty not through fear, but through his unwavering commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. He was also the man who had held my hand through my mother's funeral when I was 12, who had taught me to tie Navy knots and read nautical charts, who had driven 18 hours straight to be at my commissioning ceremony when I graduated from officer candidate school. The man who had never once questioned my decision to serve, who had been proud of every promotion, every achievement, every step forward in my career. And he was about to walk into a room where people were calling his daughter a disgrace and his grandchild a bastard. I could hear him now, just outside the door. The familiar pause as he straightened his uniform, checked his appearance, and prepared to enter what he undoubtedly assumed would be a joyful celebration of his daughter's pregnancy. He had no idea he was walking into a war zone. Linda, Derek, Jessica, and Carol were still ranting, still recording, still pouring their venom into the air. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because when Admiral James McKenzie walked through that door and saw what they were doing to his daughter, they were going to learn a lesson about respect that they would never, ever forget. The door handle turned, and I held my breath, watching as the man who had shaped me into the officer and woman I had become prepared to meet the people who thought they could tear me down. This was about to get very interesting. The silence that followed my stepfamily's departure was profound, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm passes, heavy with aftermath, but also pregnant with possibility. I stood in the middle of the Oceanview Community Center, one hand protectively over my 8-month belly, the other gripping the back of a chair for support, trying to process what had just happened. Admiral McKenzie remained at attention for several moments, his trained eyes scanning the room as if ensuring the threat had truly passed. Only when he was satisfied that we were alone with allies did his military bearings soften slightly. He turned toward me, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen since I was a little girl, having nightmares after my mother's death, pure protective paternal love, mixed with carefully controlled rage at anyone who had dared to hurt his child. "Sarah," he said softly, using the voice he'd reserved for bedtime stories and scraped knees. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" The question broke something loose inside me. All the composure I'd been fighting to maintain throughout the confrontation suddenly crumbled, and I felt tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness or defeat, but tears of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming love for the man who had just gone to war for me without a moment's hesitation. "I'm okay, Dad," I managed through my tears. "I'm okay now." But even as I said it, I could feel my body beginning to shake with delayed shock. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and emotionally raw. My baby seemed to sense my distress, kicking and squirming as if trying to comfort me from the inside. Maya was beside me in an instant, her social worker training kicking in as she assessed my condition. "Sarah, honey, you need to sit down. You've been standing for too long, and stress isn't good for the baby." Admiral McKenzie immediately moved to my other side, and together they guided me to one of the few chairs that hadn't been overturned during the chaos. As I sank into the seat, I felt my father's strong hand rest gently on my shoulder, the same gesture he'd used to comfort me through every crisis of my childhood. "Take your time, sweetheart," he said quietly. "There's no rush. We're going to take care of everything." Chief Rodriguez approached us, her expression a mixture of professional concern and personal outrage. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that what just happened here was completely unacceptable. Those people had no right to speak to you that way, pregnant or not, officer or not. They had no right as human beings." Kelly and Marcus nodded emphatically, both of them still looking slightly stunned by the magnitude of the confrontation they'd just witnessed. Marcus spoke up first, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Ma'am, I've seen some ugly stuff in my time in the Navy, but what those people did to you today, that was pure cruelty. And the fact that they recorded it, tried to broadcast your humiliation, that's not just wrong, it's evil." Kelly added, "Sarah, I hope you know that none of us, none of your real friends, will ever judge you for being a single mother. Some of the strongest women I know in the Navy are single moms, and they're incredible officers and incredible mothers." Mrs. Patterson, who had been quietly cleaning up some of the scattered decorations, looked up from her work with fierce determination in her elderly eyes. "That Admiral father of yours was right about everything he said. You are a fine young woman, and anyone who can't see that is blind and foolish." Admiral McKenzie smiled at her words, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since he'd arrived. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Your support means more than you know. Sarah has always had excellent judgment in choosing her friends." As the immediate shock began to wear off, I found myself looking around the room at the remnants of what was supposed to have been a perfect day. The baby shower decorations that Maya had spent weeks planning now looked forlorn and damaged. Gifts were scattered across the floor where Derek had knocked into the table. The beautiful cake sat half-cut and forgotten, its cheerful pink and blue flowers a stark contrast to the ugliness that had just unfolded. But as I surveyed the damage, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling devastated by the ruin of my baby shower, I felt something else entirely, a deep, abiding sense of gratitude for the people who had stayed, who had defended me, who had shown me what real family looked like. "You know what?" I said suddenly, my voice stronger than it had been since the confrontation began. "They didn't ruin anything." Everyone turned to look at me, surprised by the conviction in my tone. "They thought they were going to destroy this day, destroy this celebration," I continued, gesturing to the chaos around us. "But look around. Look at who's still here. Look at who stood up for me. Look at who showed me what real love and real family actually mean." Admiral McKenzie's expression softened with pride and understanding. "That's my daughter," he said quietly. "That's the woman I raised, someone who can find strength even in the darkest moments." Maya knelt beside my chair, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sarah, you're absolutely right. This day wasn't about decorations or cake or even gifts. It was about celebrating you and your baby and the family that loves you. And that family is right here in this room." Chief Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Lieutenant, that's the kind of leadership thinking that's going to make you an excellent mother and an even better officer. The ability to see past temporary setbacks to the bigger picture, that's a skill that can't be taught." As if summoned by our renewed sense of purpose, several more people began arriving at the community center. I looked up in confusion as the door opened, until I realized what was happening. Admiral McKenzie had clearly been making phone calls during the confrontation, and reinforcements were arriving. The first through the door was Captain Rebecca Torres, Admiral McKenzie's aide-de-camp, and one of the most respected officers in the Pacific Fleet. She was followed by Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, my direct supervisor, who looked like she'd driven directly from the base without stopping to change out of her uniform. Behind them came Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the base medical officer who had been overseeing my pregnancy care, and to my absolute amazement, Rear Admiral Patricia Hawkins, the highest-ranking woman in my chain of command. "Admiral McKenzie," Captain Torres said as she approached, "we came as soon as we received your message. Is Lieutenant McKenzie all right?" Admiral McKenzie stood and returned her salute crisply. "She's fine, Captain, but there was an incident that required immediate attention. The situation has been resolved, but I wanted senior leadership to be aware of what occurred." Lieutenant Commander Walsh approached my chair with obvious concern. "Sarah, I'm so sorry this happened." When Admiral McKenzie called and explained the situation, I couldn't believe it. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to go to the medical center?" Dr. Chen was already moving toward me with her medical bag. "Lieutenant McKenzie, let me check your blood pressure and make sure the stress hasn't affected you or the baby adversely." As Dr. Chen began her examination, Rear Admiral Hawkins surveyed the damaged room with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen her share of conflicts. "Admiral McKenzie, I understand there was harassment of one of our officers by civilian family members?" "That's correct, Admiral," my father replied. "They disrupted a private celebration, used derogatory language toward Lieutenant McKenzie, made disparaging comments about her pregnancy and her service, and recorded the incident with the apparent intention of broadcasting it online." Rear Admiral Hawkins's expression darkened. "I see. And do we have evidence of this harassment?" Admiral McKenzie produced his phone. "I recorded the entire incident for security purposes. The perpetrators also recorded portions of their attack on Lieutenant McKenzie before being ordered to stop." "Excellent," Rear Admiral Hawkins said grimly. "Captain Torres, please coordinate with base legal to review this material. If there are grounds for harassment charges or restraining orders, I want them pursued to the full extent of the law." As the senior officers discussed the legal ramifications of the incident, Dr. Chen finished her examination and smiled reassuringly. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, which is completely understandable given what you've been through, but both you and the baby appear to be fine. I'm going to recommend that you take the rest of the weekend to rest and recover from this stress." "Doctor," Admiral McKenzie interjected, "is there anything we should be concerned about regarding the emotional trauma of this incident? Any potential effects on the pregnancy?" Dr. Chen considered the question carefully. "The baby is well protected physically, and Lieutenant McKenzie's vital signs are stable. However, emotional stress can have effects, so I want her to monitor for any unusual symptoms and to prioritize self-care over the next few days. The most important thing now is for her to surround herself with supportive people and positive experiences." As if on cue, the door opened again, and this time it was my Navy friends who hadn't been able to attend the original shower. Word had clearly spread through the base network, and they had come to show their support. Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos entered carrying a beautiful bouquet of flowers, followed by Lieutenant J.G. David Park with a gift bag, and behind them came at least a dozen other service members I worked with and served alongside. "Lieutenant McKenzie," Maria said as she approached, "we heard what happened, and we wanted you to know that we're here for you, all of us." Lieutenant Park nodded emphatically. "Ma'am, we've all served with you, and we know what kind of officer and person you are. What those people said about you, it doesn't reflect reality. It reflects their ignorance." The room was quickly filling with people, but this time it felt completely different. Instead of the hostile invasion we'd experienced earlier, this felt like a gathering of a chosen family. People who had come not to judge or attack, but to support and celebrate. Rear Admiral Hawkins watched the arriving service members with obvious approval. "This," she said to Admiral McKenzie, "is what real military family looks like. This is why we serve. For each other, with each other." Admiral McKenzie nodded, his expression filled with pride as he watched the outpouring of support for his daughter. Lieutenant McKenzie has clearly earned the respect and loyalty of her peers. That speaks to her character far more eloquently than any words could. Maya, ever the organizer, began coordinating with the new arrivals to restore some order to the celebration. "If we're going to do this properly," she announced, "we need to clean up this mess and create a real baby shower atmosphere. Sarah deserves to have the celebration she planned, just with better people." What followed was something I would remember for the rest of my life. Without being asked, without any formal organization, the room full of Navy personnel, friends, and neighbors began working together to repair the damage done by my stepfamily. Chairs were righted, decorations were rehung, gifts were collected and properly arranged, and someone even managed to salvage most of the cake. Chief Rodriguez took charge of the operation with the efficiency of a seasoned naval commander. "All right, people, let's show Lieutenant McKenzie how the Navy takes care of its own. I want this room looking better than it did before those civilians tried to destroy it." Quote. As I watched my colleagues and friends transform the chaos back into a celebration, I felt my baby give a particularly strong kick, as if he or she was responding to the positive energy in the room. I placed both hands on my belly and whispered softly, "You see that, little one? That's your real family. Those are the people who are going to love you and support you and teach you what honor really means." Admiral McKenzie, who had been coordinating with the other senior officers, came to sit beside me as the restoration work continued around us. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Better than I have in months," I said honestly. "Dad, I need to thank you for what you did today. The way you stood up for me, the way you protected me. I know Mom would have been proud of both of us today." Admiral McKenzie's eyes grew misty at the mention of my mother. "Your mother would have been furious at how those people treated you, and she would have been incredibly proud of how you handled yourself. You didn't back down, you didn't let them make you feel ashamed, and you recognized that their attacks said more about them than about you." He paused, watching as Kelly and Marcus worked together to rehang the "Welcome Baby McKenzie" banner. "But I want you to know something, Sarah. What happened today, that's not going to happen again. Not while I'm alive, not while you're under my protection. I've spent my entire career defending this country's values, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone attack my daughter for embodying those same values." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a feeling I knew what he was getting at. Admiral McKenzie's expression grew serious. "I mean that I'm going to ensure there are legal consequences for what happened here today. Harassment of military personnel is a federal crime, and what they did was recorded and witnessed. They wanted to create a public spectacle. Well, they're going to get one, just not the kind they were expecting." Lieutenant Commander Walsh approached us, overhearing the tail end of our conversation. "Admiral, if I may, Base Legal has already begun reviewing the recording you provided. Initial assessment suggests clear grounds for harassment charges, possible restraining orders, and, depending on the content of their social media posts, potential cyberbullying or stalking charges as well." Captain Torres joined us, her expression grimly satisfied. "Additionally, Admiral, we've discovered that the female perpetrator was live-streaming to a public Facebook page with over 1,000 followers. That elevates this from private harassment to public defamation. Our legal team is very interested in pursuing this case." I felt a chill of satisfaction at the news. My stepfamily had come here, expecting to humiliate me without consequences. Instead, they had created a permanent record of their own cruelty and stupidity, one that could now be used against them in court. "What kind of consequences are we talking about?" I asked. "Well," Lieutenant Commander Walsh said, "at minimum, restraining orders that would legally prohibit them from contacting you or coming near you. Potentially criminal harassment charges, which could result in fines and even jail time. And if we can establish a pattern of behavior, possibly stalking charges." Admiral McKenzie nodded approvingly. "Good. I want them to understand that attacking a pregnant naval officer has consequences. I want them to understand that their actions today were not just morally reprehensible but legally actionable." As the legal discussions continued around me, I found myself watching the transformed room with wonder. What had started as a disaster was turning into something more beautiful than I had originally planned. The spontaneous gathering of my Navy family, the outpouring of support from people who barely knew me but respected what I represented, the way everyone had come together to rebuild what had been torn down, It was exactly the kind of lesson I wanted my child to learn about what real strength looked like. Dr. Chen approached with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "Lieutenant McKenzie, I want you to drink this and try to relax. Your blood pressure is still a bit elevated, and I want to make sure you and the baby are completely stable before I clear you to go home." As I sipped the tea, Maya came over with a notebook and a big smile. "Okay, so I've been talking to everyone, and we've decided that we're going to do this baby shower properly. Everyone who came to support you wants to participate in games, gift-giving, and proper celebration. Are you up for it?" I looked around the room at all the faces, some familiar, some new, all friendly and supportive, and felt my heart swell with gratitude. You know what? Yes. Let's do this right. What followed was the most unconventional but wonderful baby shower I could have imagined. Naval officers played silly guessing games with civilians. Senior leadership mixed with junior enlisted personnel over cake and punch. Mrs. Patterson regaled a group of young sailors with stories about Navy life in the 1970s. Chief Rodriguez organized a hilarious competition to see who could change a diaper fastest while blindfolded. Rear Admiral Hawkins, a woman I had always found intimidating in professional settings, surprised me by approaching with a beautifully wrapped gift and a warm smile. "Lieutenant McKenzie, I wanted to give you something personal, from one military mother to another." Inside the box was a silver locket engraved with an anchor and the words, "Steady as she goes." Inside the locket was a tiny photo of my mother in her Navy wife days, standing beside Admiral McKenzie in his younger uniform. "Admiral McKenzie provided the photo," Rear Admiral Hawkins explained. "I thought you might want to carry your mother with you as you begin your own journey into motherhood." I couldn't speak through my tears, so I simply hugged her, probably the first time in naval history that a pregnant lieutenant had hugged a rear admiral at a baby shower, but it felt like exactly the right thing to do. As the afternoon continued, people began sharing stories about their own experiences with military families, single parenthood, and the challenges of balancing service with personal life. I listened to tales of deployment births, childcare networks created by military spouses, and the unique strength that comes from being part of a community dedicated to something larger than themselves. Lieutenant Park, who I'd always known as quiet and professional, surprised me by sharing that he'd been raised by a single mother who was an Air Force sergeant. "Ma'am, my mom always told me that some of the strongest families are the ones that choose each other instead of just inheriting each other. What I've seen here today proves that." Chief Rodriguez added her own perspective. "Lieutenant, I've been in the Navy for 22 years, and I've served with a lot of single parents. What makes the difference isn't whether there are two parents or one, it's whether that parent has the support of their military family. And you clearly do." As the celebration reached its peak, Admiral McKenzie stood up and called for attention. The room gradually quieted as everyone turned toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in his formal briefing voice, "I want to thank all of you for being here today, for supporting my daughter, and for showing her what real family looks like." He paused, his eyes finding mine across the room. "Earlier today, some people tried to shame Lieutenant McKenzie for her choices, for her pregnancy, and for her commitment to service. They wanted to make her feel isolated, judged, and alone. What they didn't understand is that they were attacking not just an individual, but a member of the United States Navy family." The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on his words. "What you've shown here today is why those people failed, and why they'll always fail when they try to tear down someone with real honor and real courage. You've shown that true family isn't about blood relationships or traditional expectations. True family is about showing up for each other, supporting each other's dreams, and standing together against anyone who tries to tear us down." He looked directly at me, his voice growing softer but somehow more powerful. "Sarah, your mother and I raised you to be strong, independent, and committed to service. We raised you to make your own choices and to stand by them with courage and dignity. Today, you've shown that you internalized those lessons. But more importantly, you've shown that you've built a family of choice that reflects those same values." Admiral McKenzie gestured to encompass the entire room. "This child you're carrying is going to grow up surrounded by this kind of love, this kind of support, this kind of honor. They're going to learn what it means to serve something bigger than yourself, what it means to stand up for what's right, and what it means to choose family based on character rather than convenience. He paused, and I could see emotion working in his expression. I could not be more proud of the woman you've become, the officer you are, and the mother you're going to be. And I know that your mother, wherever she is looking down on this room today with the same pride I feel. The room erupted in applause, and I found myself crying again. But these were tears of joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love for all the people who had chosen to be part of my story. As the formal celebration began to wind down, people started approaching me individually to offer their personal support and contact information. I collected phone numbers, email addresses, and promises of babysitting from people I'd known for years, and people I'd just met today. Mrs. Patterson pressed a piece of paper into my hand with her phone number and the words, "Call me anytime, day or night, if you need anything at all." That's what neighbors do for each other. Chief Rodriguez handed me a business card with her personal information. "Lieutenant, when you come back from maternity leave, you call me. I'll help you navigate the childcare situation and make sure you have everything you need to succeed as a working mom." Maya, of course, had already created a detailed support network plan, complete with schedules, contact lists, and backup plans for every conceivable scenario. "Sarah, you're never going to be alone in this. We've got you covered." As the crowd began to thin out, Admiral McKenzie and I found ourselves sitting together at one of the tables, surrounded by gifts and leftover cake, watching the last few people clean up and say their goodbyes. "Dad," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something." "Anything, sweetheart." "Do you think I'm making the right choice? Having this baby, trying to balance motherhood with my naval career, doing it all as a single parent?" Admiral McKenzie was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, I think you're making the only choice you could make and still be true to who you are. You're not having this baby because it's easy or convenient. You're having this baby because you believe in the value of life, in the importance of family, and in your own ability to rise to any challenge." He reached over and took my hand. "Will it be difficult? Yes. Will there be times when you question yourself? Absolutely. Will you sometimes feel overwhelmed or exhausted or unsure? Of course. But will you succeed? Will you be an excellent mother and an excellent officer? Will you raise a child who embodies the same values you've dedicated your life to serving?" Admiral McKenzie smiled, and for a moment I saw not the stern naval commander but the loving father who had read me bedtime stories and taught me to ride a bike. "Sarah, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are going to be an extraordinary mother, and your child is going to be incredibly lucky to have you." Quote. As we sat there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had been attacked, destroyed, and rebuilt into something even more beautiful, I felt my baby give another strong kick. I placed Admiral McKenzie's hand on my belly so he could feel his grandchild's movement. "There," I said softly, "your grandchild is saying hello." Admiral McKenzie's eyes filled with tears as he felt the baby's kicks. "Hello there, little one," he whispered. "This is your grandfather. I want you to know that you're coming into a world where you'll be surrounded by people who love you, who will protect you, and who will teach you what honor really means." The baby seemed to respond to his voice, kicking more vigorously, and we both laughed through our tears. "You know," Admiral McKenzie said thoughtfully, "your mother always said that the best families are the ones that survive the storms together. Today we survived a storm, and we came out stronger on the other side." He gestured to the transformed room around us. "This is what your mother would have wanted for you, Sarah. Not a perfect life without challenges, but a life surrounded by people who would stand with you when the challenges came. People who would help you rebuild when things got torn down. People who would choose to be family with you regardless of blood or law or tradition." As we prepared to leave the community center, I took one last look around the room. Tomorrow, it would be just an empty space again, available for rent by other families celebrating other milestones. But tonight, it had been the site of a battle and a victory. My step-family had come here to destroy my celebration, to shame me into submission, and to prove that I was isolated and alone. Instead, they had inadvertently revealed the strength of my real family, the depth of support I had available to me, and the kind of community I had built around myself. They had tried to use my pregnancy as a weapon against me, suggesting that it made me weak, irresponsible, or unworthy. Instead, it had become a rallying point for people who understood that strength comes in many forms, and that choosing to bring life into the world while serving your country is an act of incredible courage. Most importantly, they had tried to define family in narrow, traditional terms that excluded anyone who didn't fit their expectations. Instead, they had been confronted with a demonstration of what real family actually looks like. People who choose each other, support each other, and stand together against any force that tries to tear them apart. 6 weeks later, I went into labor during a Tuesday morning briefing. Admiral McKenzie was in my delivery room, holding my hand and coaching me through contractions with the same steady leadership he'd used to command ships and fleets. Maya was there too, armed with ice chips and encouraging words. Chief Rodriguez showed up in her dress blues during her lunch break to meet the newest member of our Navy family. When my daughter, Elizabeth James McKenzie, named for my mother and my father, took her first breath, the room was filled with people who had chosen to be family with us. Not one of them was related to me by blood, but all of them were connected to me by something stronger: shared values, mutual respect, and the kind of love that has to be earned rather than inherited. Admiral McKenzie was the first to hold his granddaughter, and as I watched this decorated war hero cradle a tiny baby with infinite tenderness, I knew that Elizabeth would grow up understanding what real strength looked like. 3 months later, I returned to active duty with the full support of my chain of command and a carefully coordinated childcare network that included Mrs. Patterson, Maya, several Navy families, and Admiral McKenzie himself, who had arranged his schedule to provide backup care whenever needed. My step-family never contacted us again. The legal consequences of their actions included restraining orders, fines for harassment, and a civil judgment that required them to pay my legal fees. But more importantly, their public humiliation taught them a lesson about the difference between real family and biological coincidence. Today, as I write this story, Lieutenant Commander Sarah McKenzie is serving as the executive officer of a destroyer homeported in San Diego. Elizabeth is 3 years old, speaks in complete sentences, and has never known a world where she wasn't surrounded by people who chose to love her. She calls Admiral McKenzie Grandpa Admiral, Mrs. Patterson, Grammy Pat, and Maya Aunt Maya. She thinks it's perfectly normal for her mommy to wear a uniform to work, and for her extended family to include people of every rank, age, and background, united only by their commitment to service and their love for each other. Last month, at Elizabeth's 3rd birthday party, she asked me why some kids have daddies and she doesn't. I knelt down to her level and said, "Baby girl, some families are built one way, and some families are built another way. Our family is built on love and choice and honor, and that makes us very, very lucky." She thought about this for a moment, then nodded solemnly and said, "Okay, Mommy, can I have cake now?" And as I watched her run back to her party, surrounded by Navy personnel, retired neighbors, college friends, and the man she calls Grandpa Admiral, I knew that we had indeed been very, very lucky. Not because our path had been easy, but because when the storms came, we had discovered who our real family was. And that family had proven strong enough to weather anything the world could throw at us. The people who had tried to shame us, to break us, to make us feel isolated and alone, had inadvertently given us the greatest gift possible: the knowledge that we were loved, supported, and valued by people who chose us not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that, I realized, was what real family had always meant.